Conor Benn will take on super welterweight Rodolfo Orozco at the Matchroom boxing event in Orlando this Saturday night. Ben is back, Simon. Hasn't fought, of course, since April 2022 after failing 2 voluntary drug tests, heading into the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, if you remember, last October. So he's back and he fights in Orlando. Significantly, he's not fighting here in the UK. He's fighting in Orlando, Florida. This was Eddie Hearn, his promoter, on that very fact yesterday.
He hasn't boxed for 18 months. Financially, it's broken him. You know, he's spent hundreds of thousands on scientific investigations, in lawyers, in the whole process. And, you know, it's time for him to fight. And for those people who say he shouldn't be fighting, it's like, he's been cleared. His suspension has been lifted. What do you want him to do? Just sit there for another 6 months, wilting away? Like, he's been through the WBC hearing. They reinstated him in the rankings. He's been through the UCAD hearing. They cleared him. They relieved his suspension. They didn't fine him. He's cleared to fight. It's time. And on Saturday, you're going to see one of the best young fighters in the world begin his career once again.
So according to Eddie, it's all quite straightforward, isn't it? Yeah, so it begs the question, are we going to see him fight here anytime soon? Just before we came on air, I spoke to Robert Smith of the British Boxing Board of Control. And I put it to him, Robert, here's the thing. Ben returns this weekend, gets back in the ring, over in Orlando, Florida. What's your reaction to that?
I'm not surprised. Obviously, he's not licensed by the British Boxing Board of Control. I understand he's licensed by a commission in America. They must be satisfied as to everything's in order. I presume they've done their investigations. And if they're happy for him to box, there's, it's up to them.
From your board's perspective, are you comfortable? He fights in the States, and as a board, have you given him your blessing to do that?
Well, the only communication I've had, Jim, is from journalists in Florida and the Florida Commission asking what the situation is, of which I've gone back and said he's not licensed by the Boxing Board of Control. There's an appeal in process, and until that is dealt with, we won't be, obviously can't give permission for him to box in this country for sure. If they're happy for him to box over there with the investigation they've done, on which I don't know what they are, then ultimately it's up to them. That's the trouble with no world governing body, Jim. You know that as well as I do.
So can you elaborate on that for me, Robert? Is the board still appealing the independent anti-doping panel's decision to lift Conor's suspension? We're
appealing, along with UCAD, the National Anti-Doping's decision a couple of months ago. We're just waiting for that appeal to happen. We're waiting for a date. A bit frustrated it's taken so long to get a date. We're ready to go. I understand UCAD are ready to go. We've asked for a date as soon as possible. Obviously, things have to be put in place. Not really in our hands. They've got our appeal before them. They've got UCAD's appeal before them. We're just waiting for a date to take place.
If you lose that appeal, Robert, does that mean that Conor Benn gets his licence back to fight in the UK again?
Jim, you know me a while. I don't speculate. I don't do ifs, whens and buts. We'll just wait and see what happens. Obviously, we'll be very disappointed. We were very disappointed in the original decision. And if we were to lose the next one, we'd be disappointed. We'll have to take on board what that decision is and how they came to it. And then we'll decide what we need to do.
You'll be aware that both Eddie Hearn and Calla Sauerland have been talking up the prospects of Conor Benn fighting Eubank Jr. Currently, they can't fight here. So it might happen, if it does happen, it might happen abroad. If Conor Benn hasn't cleared his name, would there be any ramifications for Eubank Jr. to proceed with such a fight? Because Eubank Jr. is a licence holder.
He certainly is. And if we received an application for him to box, we'll have to consider it very, very carefully, and the ramifications and what it all happens with regard to the sport as a whole. Don't forget, we're looking after the sport, not individuals. We're looking after the whole sport. This appeal will affect all sports, not just ours. So we hope it goes our way.
Yesterday, Robert, Eddie Hearn said that people need to accept that Conor Benn has cleared his name and that boxing needs to move on. Why don't you think that? And how does he achieve total exoneration?
But he hasn't cleared it. A number of issues are still outstanding, which everybody's aware of. We've decided to appeal a decision, and until that decision, once the appeal has taken place, we'll take it on board from there. But no. When you say you cleared his name, according to us, we have an explanation of how positive tests came about. So I don't quite agree with Eddie on that one.
How do you yourself feel, Robert? Are you comfortable Conor Benn fights this weekend?
Well, if you talk to me personally, I work for an organisation that looks after the whole of boxing. I don't think this whole saga has been good for boxing, personally. Although it's a sport, and we don't deal with teams, we deal with individuals, and sometimes people look after themselves other than the sport in general, which is slightly disappointing. I understand why they do it, but no, I don't think he should be boxing. Personally, I don't think he should be boxing until this matter is cleared. And hopefully that'll be done as soon as possible, then we can get back on track. It's taken too long to get where we are.
Will you watch the fight?
No.
And that was that. So he fights in Orlando, Florida, Simon. We'll get into some of the nitty-gritty of what Robert was saying there. But why is it acceptable to the Florida Commission to have the fight there? Why did they deem it acceptable?
God only knows. People will have certain views on that commission, and if you talk to the boxing fraternity, certain people will have certain views that they aren't the greatest of commissions. But you'll have to ask them that question. I mean, look, if he's cleared, as Eddie Hearn keeps on saying, why didn't he stick him on the undercard of his event next week in London? Because he's not cleared, and this silly, ridiculous assertion that Eddie keeps on running around suggesting that he's been cleared is not correct. It's not accurate. He hasn't gone through due process. He's been in front of the WBC where they gave him an alternate defence. And the challenge for this set of circumstances, the reasons why Eddie Hearn is so focused on Conor Benn, let's have it right, whether people think this is an agenda or whatever, is because there's two component parts to it. One is a pound note, and the other is his obligations to produce content for DAZN, which is a platform which isn't doing particularly well right now. Those are the two focus. So when I sit listening to Eddie on Drive telling me and everyone else that he's so focused on the well-being of this young man, if he was focused on the well-being of this young man, he'd have given him a damn sight better advice than the advice that Conor has had. Because whatever happens with Conor Benn now, whether it's right or wrong, there is a significant part of the boxing fraternity and the general public that will vilify this kid forever, because of the way he's been handled, the way he's been represented, the choices that he's made, and the observations that are being made about him. And he shouldn't be fighting in America now. He should be going through the process of clearing his name, not this preposterous misrepresentation that gets caught up in people's... What about what Ben Shalom did? What about what Frank Warren's done? Yeah. OK, fine, let's deal with them in isolation, but let's deal with this situation.
We might get more clarity on actually what the Florida Commission is all about when Deontay Wilder's coach, Malik Scott, joins us a little later this morning.
You can read between the lines with Robert Smith.
Yeah.
They're not impressed. They're not happy with this. They don't think it passes the sniff test, but they can't stop him from going to fight in America. They haven't given their blessing. They haven't given their support to it. They've answered the questions as a matter of fact. We have a situation where we have a fighter that was suspended. That suspension has been lifted, and that's the state of play. He doesn't have a British Boxing Board of Control licence. That's all we can tell you.
Well, here's the thing. The board's still appealing the independent anti-doping panel's decision to lift Conor's suspension. If that appeal is lost against the British Boxing Board of Control, that surely paves the way for Ben to get his licence back and fight here in the UK.
This is the fascinating territory, right? This is where the challenges come. It's absolutely right that the British Boxing Board of Control die on this hill or win on this hill, right? Because you cannot have a situation, which is why I made the observation last week about what's the point of VADA testing if people can get around it with jurisdiction. VADA testing has been proven by the Ben legal team to have no jurisdiction for judgment attached to it. So bottom lining it, you have a VADA test, you fail it, and then the UK, the governing body, can't do anything about it. You can't sanction somebody for it because they can rock off the WBC or give you a defence. So when you look at this question now, if they win this appeal, then it takes care of itself, because Ben is going to have to face the obligations of overcoming strict liability. If they lose this appeal, then they've got another hill that they've got to go and die on potentially, which is if he comes back for his licence, is he in good standing? Does he qualify to be a member of a club, which is effectively what you are when you're licensed by the British Boxing Board of Control in this country? You go to a club and you join it and you abide by their rules. Will they have to be forced into that circumstances because they don't believe that he's met the burden that he should have met? So will there be a legal challenge there? Restriction of trade? I don't think so. The next question is, if he doesn't apply for his licence, because he goes, up yours, I'll do what Tyson Fury's done, which is get an overseas licence, and I will then come back and I'll fight here, then the challenges will be, or I'll fight somewhere else. What do you do with others that have British Boxing Board of Control licences? What does Chris Eubank get told? Did the British Boxing Board of Control say to Chris Eubank, I'll tell you what's going to happen to you. He's not in good standing. So you fight him, and anyone that's attached to you whether it's sparring partners.
They're not going to enforce that, are they?
Well,
they're not going to enforce that.
This is the question about how much how much jurisdiction, how much substance, and how much meaning the British Boxing Board of Control have. Most sports will be looking at this, understanding that UKAD is the preferred or the definitive governing body for anti-doping in this country, and UKAD has been superseded by a jurisdiction argument that VADA, or more to the point, that the lawyers of Conor Benn have been able to achieve. So this is a hill that is absolutely worth them dying on. And when you listen to this background noise about what's going on here, yes, they should all do better. Yes, Ben should have got VADA testing in place for the Eubank-Smith fight, so that argument could have been settled down.
Yeah.
Yes, Tyson Fury has been in the past sanctioned for taking alleged to take Nandrolone and got a retrospective ban, which probably wasn't fit for purpose, quite frankly, because he was out of the ring when that ban was being served. We all know that. But here we are now at the genesis of a real situation that's taking this sport into disrepute, and it's being ridden roughshod over for one reason, not because people care about the individual, not because they care about the sport, because there's money in it for them and there's an obligation to another broadcaster, and it's really, really poor.
Okay.
Poor. And Conor is the one that's going to cop all of this.